and welcome to Carers Talk, the podcast for carers, where we share advice, information and carers' experiences. My name's Michelle and I'm your host, and this podcast is brought to you by Carers Trust Solihull. We hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to another episode of Carers Talk. In this episode we're going to be talking about end of life, and I'm joined here by Alyson, who is an adult carer practitioner here with the Carers Trust Solihull. Alyson has a lead in end of life. Hello, Alyson.
Hello.
Alyson, would you like to introduce yourself and a bit about the role that you have in the Carers Trust?
Yeah, so I've been at the Carers Trust for nearly 2 years now. I can't believe it, time's flown. I am one of the adult teams, so we support adult carers and people caring for adults. We also support parent carers in lots of different ways. We'll do assessments and reviews with them. We will be at the end of the phone for any advice, queries, information, emotional support, that type of thing. We'll also register new carers with us and find out what support they need from us. So it's a little bit of everything, really. It's lovely.
Yeah. And your lead in it, because every member of the team has a specialism, and yours is the end of life. Can you explain a little bit about that and what you do?
Yeah, so it's a funny sort of topic, really, isn't it? It's one that people don't like to think about. And I suppose it comes because by background, I'm a social worker. And just before I joined the Carers Trust, I worked for about 5.5 years in a local hospice. So I was a social worker there supporting people and families who were approaching end of life in the inpatient unit and in the community. And I guess it's a term, end of life. We don't really know what it means, or there's no sort of maybe single description of what it means. I guess for us here in the Carers Trust, we know that carers will be caring for their loved ones right up to end of life, or until for whatever other reason they stop being a carer. Usually, I like to think of end of life, and certainly in terms of how we support people in the Carers Trust, I like to think of it being anybody who is caring for someone who has an illness or a health condition that will ultimately lead to their death, I suppose. We typically, when we think of end of life, think of cancer. That's very traditional, isn't it? We think of that. But actually, in the Carers Trust and I would say in end-of-life services and organisations more generally, now there's a much better recognition and support for people with lots of different illnesses. Mm-hmm. That might be neurological illnesses, maybe like motor neuron disease is one that we're starting to hear more about, and other neurological conditions, Parkinson's and so on. It might also be people with maybe cardiac problems or respiratory problems, COPD, and those sorts of things. But equally, and we don't always think about this, it can be people, it absolutely is people with dementia. Yeah. And that's often forgotten about.
I think so, yeah.
And actually also it's really important to think about people with dementia and end of life, because their needs may be very different, and the needs of the carer may actually be very different to someone who's got what we consider more of a physical illness or condition. So we try and think about end of life holistically. It's not only people who maybe have a prognosis of short months or anything like that. We try and support anybody as early as they need to be supported, and with any condition that will lead to their death.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And like you say, especially around dementia and things like that, because you know, there's things like anticipatory grief, isn't there?
Absolutely.
And the complicated emotions that come with all of that. But when we talk about end of life, we don't talk about end of life.
We don't.
In that sense.
Yeah.
And I think it not just for carers, in everyday life, in all our personal lives as a society, we probably aren't as open as we should be, really, around death.
Absolutely. And actually, I guess if there's one thing to sort of maybe for us to get across today, it is the importance of talking about death and dying.
Yeah.
But somehow, and I think this is a more recent thing, somehow generalising as a society, we don't like to talk about death and dying. In fact, we don't even like to use the words death and dying.
I agree, yeah.
Apparently, there are over 200 euphemisms in the English language for death and dying.
Oh my God.
I know, 200, I know. So it just shows you how language has evolved and how we talk about lots of things that actually aren't always very clear and very helpful. And I totally understand why. And it's really tough because we're talking about people we love. Uh-huh. And it's really tough to say the words, I think you're going to die, or my dad died. we talk about that he passed away, sometimes even more vague euphemisms. And actually, for lots of reasons, I think it's important to use words, if you can, as honestly as you can. And I think that not just important for ourselves, but of course, when we will talk to people, we will use whatever language they want us to use. We will absolutely be guided with them. But I guess if we think about it and we think about maybe children, or if we're supporting people maybe with a learning disability or other needs, if we talk about daddy going to sleep, actually, that's really confusing, and that can be frightening, and it can be misleading, because children and other people can take things quite literally. And so actually, unknowingly, and thinking that we're being gentle and kind, we could be perhaps even instilling a fear in a child that we certainly wouldn't intend to. So I think if we can, it's important to talk about death and dying, and to use the language around it as best we can.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And generally, it can be about the person's wishes and things like that, can't it? So what would you say are some of the benefits of talking about end of life and dying?
Absolutely. I think you're right. It's going to happen to all of us. Talking about it, there's a very famous palliative care doctor, Dr. Kathryn Mannix, which I would encourage anybody who's interested in somebody to read about. And she says, talking about it doesn't make it happen. And you think, of course not. Yeah. But there's lots of benefits. Firstly, talking about end of life, talking about death and dying is the best way for someone to feel prepared. And that might be the person who's poorly. Yeah. It might be the carer, it might be another family member. But if we don't talk about it, we may all be thinking about it, but we're not prepared. We don't know we're not mind readers. We don't know what each other wants. Yeah. So by talking about it, you can have open conversations about what people's wishes are, and equally what they don't want to happen. You can talk about what their fears are, and then you can get the support in place to reassure them about those fears. Yeah. Lots of people have a fear of being in pain. And actually, with the right support around, that shouldn't be the case at all. Nurses and doctors are really qualified to help people with things like that. And so reassurance can remove some of those fears. But until we know about it, we can't.
Completely, yeah.
So that's one big thing. Another thing is families can get complicated, and we can all do what we think is the best for someone, but we can also sometimes have different opinions about what the best thing is. Yes. Sometimes we don't want it, but sometimes there can be conflict within families, or things like this can lead to conflict, because especially if it's not talked about, and then afterwards, when you're in a state of grief and you don't know what end of you is up, you're all trying to make decisions really quickly about what someone would have wanted, and you've all got different knowledge of the person. Yeah. So by talking about it and setting out what you want when you die, you're really helping your family, aren't you?
Yeah, I've never thought about it like that, but that's completely true.
It's important, isn't it? You're actually helping them with their grief, I would say, because you're allowing them to support you and to put things in place so that they know afterwards they've done what they can for you. They've heard what you wanted, and as far as is possible, and it's not always possible to do exactly what someone wants, but you have tried your best. And I really think you mentioned earlier about sort of complicated grief and so on. Yeah. And actually complicated grief, I think, and I'm not a counsellor, but that can happen, as I understand it, for lots of very good reasons. But talking about it can reduce some of that, because you've heard what they want, you've done what you can for them. Yeah. And kind of take comfort in that.
Yeah. I think it is a blessing if you can be open and talk about these things for everyone involved.
Absolutely. So lots of good reasons to talk about it. Not many reasons for not talking about it, other than this natural fear and anxiety that we have. So it is a difficult thing. As much as I will bang on about how it's important, I do know it's not an easy thing to talk about.
And do you have any advice for someone who may be struggling to approach the subject, and how they might be able to kind of ease into the subject with the person? I mean, it might be that certainly when I was supporting carers, the person they were caring for was quite at peace with the dying and wanted to speak about it, but it was the carer who struggled, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can be, for lots of reasons as well. That might be guilt. The carer might worry that if they're broaching this subject, that the person they're caring for might somehow think they want them to die. Or, there are just so many emotions, and it's very individual. But absolutely broach the conversation gently. I would say one tip maybe is to introduce it in a very gentle, natural, broad way. Not, well, the district nurse has just been, we know that you're dying. What do you want to happen to you? But rather, I watched a TV programme the other day and it got me thinking about what I would want, at the end of my life. And I realised it's something we don't talk about very often. Got me thinking, have you ever thought about that? I wonder what you'd want. So there's something about making it personal to you or general to everybody and not targeting it at the person.
Yeah.
And that, I think, could be your way of sort of feeling your way into the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's another thing, is feel your way into the conversation, engage how much they want to talk, and indeed whether they want to talk to you or whether they want to talk to somebody else.
That's a really good point, yeah. Because it might be upsetting for them to talk to family. It might be better if they spoke to someone externally.
Absolutely. But by starting the conversation, you are giving a clear signal to that person that it's okay if they do want to talk to you, that you are open and ready to hear and listen to what they want to say. Now, I tried this. I told you I've tried this with my dad. My dad died 5 years ago. And I tried, and I was a palliative care social worker at the time. So I tried all the gentle tricks, and he just did not want to talk to me because he was that classic Northern Irish father and his job was to protect his daughters and not talk about things. But ultimately he did finally slide a little bit of paper across the table saying, these are the songs I'd like at my funeral. And that was as far as I could get with him, but that was really important.
Yes.
So it took a long time to get there, and I think there would have been other people better than me that he could have talked to, but at least he did talk to me, and he knew then I was okay to talk to him about it. So I think there's a few things, just going back to how to have the conversation. General introduction, soft introduction, feel your way into the conversation.
Yeah.
Be ready to stop. Don't push it. Just because it's on your mind doesn't mean it's on their mind. So try and pick a time when you think they're not tired or stressed or in pain and you think they might be more open to the conversation. Sometimes side-by-side conversations, driving or walking or whatever, rather than that eye contact can be good as well, because it takes the pressure off the person. I think that's probably a general rule for conversations in life. So there are things like that. And I think just being very gentle and saying, I know this isn't an easy thing to talk about, but actually it is. I'm here to talk to you if you want to. And that might be now, that might be in the future. So you're kind of just planting the seed sometimes and then coming back to it afterwards. It's very often something you work yourselves up for, and you have to have that conversation. You don't have to have it all there and then. I think the other thing is, when you're anxious about a conversation like this, it's really hard to pause and listen. And actually, isn't that the most important thing?
Yeah.
You're opening up the space of the conversation. Now you need to listen and hear what they're saying and really understand that and be ready to just tease things out a little bit more.
And receive it.
And show that you're receiving it, being reassuring and respectful and taking it seriously.
Yeah.
Also maybe challenging if they're saying they want to talk about it and this is like what they want you to do and they want you to promise something.
Yeah.
If actually you can't promise it, be gently honest about that. I will do my absolute best, but sometimes things happen that none of us can predict.
Yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll just work through those things at the time as best we can.
Yeah.
But it's really good for me to know what you want and I will do my best by that.
Yeah. And sometimes that's enough to promise that. And I think it's really important. And I like when you mentioned about sowing the seeds as well, because like your dad, it sounded like that you sowed those seeds. And even though you maybe have felt that you weren't getting through to him, you obviously were.
Ultimately, eventually. And that was just, when he just passed that wee bit of paper over the table, it was just lovely, actually. It was really good for me because I knew that it was important to him and he wanted to do it. And that was giving him control over something that perhaps when you think about it, you don't tell people what you want at your funeral. Really hard for us to know, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that meant actually by the time the funeral came as well, I was able to listen to those songs and tell the funeral director what those songs were. And they were really, not just me, my two sisters as well, but that was really personal. We knew those were his wishes and that was really good.
And that he's a part of it as well. He was there and he's a part of his final journey, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now that we've opened the door to the conversation, what kind of things should we be asking or potentially thinking about when we're approaching this subject?
Yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it? Because there'll be certain things that you do need to know about. I guess one big thing is what that person's wishes are for their future care and support.
Mm-hmm.
So that might include things like if they were poorly or were in pain or the ambulance were called or something, would they want to go into hospital or would they not? And in what circumstances would they or wouldn't they? Now, that might be something that you sow the seed for and get them to start to think about, but it might also be that a doctor or a nurse, maybe the district nurse, maybe the GP, maybe any specialist who becomes involved, will actually take that and will probe much more deeply about that.
Mm-hmm.
And that can all be recorded. There's a form that doctors and nurses, people might know about, they will use called a respect form. It used to be a DNR form, a do not resuscitate form. It's actually much broader these days, and it includes the person's wishes and feelings around different types of treatment, ceilings of care, as well as things like resuscitation. So there will be decisions about that the person will have a strong opinion on.
When would that happen? Will the nurses trigger that process, or is that something a carer would? Yeah, the nurses would.
Yes. So I think it's always good to get the person to start to think about it earlier. And if you feel able to as a carer, that's a good thing to say. I'm conscious you've been in hospital quite a few times, Mum. That might be something you want to think about, and that might be something we can ask the district nurse about when they next come and visit.
Yeah.
Do you have to go into hospital or are there any other options?
Uh-huh.
But then always that form, that respect form, will always be triggered in terms of the conversation about it and actually completed by a medical professional. And that might be a nurse or it might be a doctor.
Okay.
So they will always do that. And they will leave a copy of that form with the person so that it's there in the house. So that, again, if anybody needed it, like maybe paramedics or anybody else needed it, it's there in the house. And that absolutely ensures that the person's wishes, they're seen, they're written down, they're read, and they are adhered to as far as possible.
And can a carer, can they request that if one hasn't been done or they're not aware of one?
I would say so. Yes, absolutely. I think it's just a sensitive conversation with the doctor saying, oh, I've heard about this form and I know that my mum's got wishes around this. This is something that you can do. Is now the right time or it might be better? But they are very good. District nurses in particular support so many people towards and right up to the end of life that they will know and they will be looking out for the signs of when the time is ready to have those conversations. And they'll also be looking out for the signs of changes in the person so that they can guide the person and the family around actually, you know, how poorly they're becoming when things are changing.
Yeah.
So they are very, very knowledgeable, very skilled at that.
In my own life, my nan, I found that the care team around end of life, very good in the sense that they will guide you through those processes and it will automatically be kind of triggered, those things. So what I would say to carers is just be open, honest with the person that you care for, but also professionals, because they will lead the way right now.
Absolutely. They will lead the way and they will have these conversations and they will guide. That is their job, as well as the kind of the nursing or the medical aspects of this. Their job is quite holistic and it's to support the person through the process emotionally as well as physically and to support the family. So again, the more you can be open with them about particularly any worries or fears that you have, the more that they can understand and support you.
Definitely.
And they're very skilled. I think the other obvious thing is about funeral wishes. And again, like in the case of my dad, he did tell me what he wanted, but you need to know what someone wants to have. And actually the other thing that you can get these days, if you want to have the conversation or not sure about all the options for funerals or things like that, there are forms that you can download. There's an organisation called I think it's the Robson Trust. And I just came across the other day, I think it was a form on there. And if any carers want any bits of information like this, they can contact the Carers Trust.
Yeah, and I'll leave it in the show notes below. I'll put a link to all of the things we discussed.
Brilliant. So there's a form that you can download that can help you think about various aspects of a funeral, what music the person wants. Do they want flowers? Do they want a charity donation? Do they want people to wear black? Do they want people to wear, in my dad's case, we wore bright clothes. Even the funeral directors put on bright pink ties for us. They went back in and changed for us. It was so lovely. And people had Hawaiian shirts. Now, that's very personal. Some people would think that was awful and disrespectful, and that's fine. And again, isn't that why it's so important to have the conversation?
It really is.
So funeral wishes is one. Other things you might want to know people's wishes are things like organ donation.
Yeah, big one.
That's luckily we're talking about that more and more. Also things like what you want to happen with any pets that you have. And there are charities that can support that. And there are lots of charities, one of which I know is the Cinnamon Trust. And actually they can support people if, let's say, someone's becoming more poorly and they can't look after their dog or cat or hamster or parrot, whatever it is. I think it's any animal. They can't take them for walks or they can't look after them any longer. Charities like the Cinnamon Trust, I'm sure there are others, can support with that on a temporary or permanent basis. But pets are very important to people.
Very important.
Hugely important. So you will be giving comfort to the person by asking what they want to happen and then being able to put those arrangements in place.
Yes.
That'll be really reassuring for them. Digital legacies, things like that. And then ultimately, people, we think about wills, but there's also something called power of attorney.
Yes.
So a will is what you want to happen to your estate after you've died. And you can include arrangements in that for maybe if you're a carer for maybe an adult child that's maybe got a learning disability or some other, substantial needs. You can put provisions in your will and trust arrangements for how that person's to be looked after again. How comforting to know that you've been able to set things in motion and have things the way you want them to be. You know that person well. So there are things like that. But then there's also something that I would just touch on called power of attorney or lasting power of attorney. And that's really important because sometimes when someone gets more poorly or have particular illnesses, sometimes people reach a point where they might not be able to make some decisions for themselves. And a lasting power of attorney is something that allows you to decide who you want to make those decisions for you if that time would come. That might be decisions about finances and property. It might be decisions about health and care. And I'm sure you've done another podcast all about that. And I know we do workshops. Yeah. And again, there's support available for that. So those are lots of things that you might want to talk about, but maybe not all in one go.
Yeah. Drop the seeds.
Yes. Yeah. Sow the seeds. And just let it be an ongoing process.
But sometimes the practical things like wills and estates are sometimes the way in, aren't they, to approach these things?
Absolutely.
Because, people probably feel more comfortable talking about those practical things, but less, they find it harder to talk about the wishes side of things. So, yeah, it might be a good way in.
Yeah. And I think TV and films are a good way in as well. We're starting to see, things being broadcast more like, in a particular soap, there's a person with motor neuron disease. And there've been lots of sort of things, you might not watch soaps, but there've been lots of sort of scripts about, end of life there. So hopefully things like that, if you're just sitting side by side watching the telly at night, you're like, that's really interesting. I never thought about what I'd want to happen. Gosh, it's quite difficult, but maybe it's something we should think about. And that might be all you do. And it might be a few years later that you pick up, but you've sown the seeds.
Yeah. No, I think it's really good and of raising awareness and the discussion really around end of life. Now, caring responsibilities can have difficulties, but I think when we're talking about end of life and caring for someone who is end of life, it comes with its own set of unique challenges, really, doesn't it? How would you go about explaining the support that may be available for carers?
Absolutely. I think that's really important because I think carers can feel quite isolated in their caring role. And particularly if you're caring for someone who's getting more poorly, you can feel even more isolated.
Yeah.
You might not feel like the people around you have got experience of that. It's new to you all. You might be able to physically get out of the house less because your caring role is growing.
Yeah.
But it's really important to know that there is a lot of support available for you. So please don't feel isolated. If nothing else, call the Carers Trust.
Yeah, we can point you in the right direction.
Exactly. But in terms of the support available, you first of all, the sort of the primary people I would say are the GP and the district nurses attached to the GP surgery. And yes, we know they're busy and we know it's difficult to get hold of them sometimes, but actually this is a really big part of their job and something they're skilled at. And also, they will know of almost the next step out in terms of the network of professional support. So if someone is struggling with particular symptoms, or there is extra support needed, maybe support around mobility, equipment that might be needed that's not been needed before, the district nurse or the GP, or indeed, I guess I would put social services into this category too, will know of people like occupational therapists and physiotherapists. They will know about the specialist nurses and doctors through charities such as Macmillan and Mariecurie. Certainly locally in Solihull, those would be the two specialist organisations. Though we've probably heard of Macmillan nurses, there are also Mariecurie nurses who do a similar job, and depending on your GP surgery. And if it's needed, and your GP or district nurse will be able to assess whether that extra support is needed, and they will then bring those in.
Yeah.
So, kind of what we don't want to do is overwhelm people with a whole range of different professionals and have them feel like it's on their shoulders to contact them.
That's important. Yeah.
Actually, just know to speak to your GP or your district nurse, share your concerns, and they might be able to organise some of the things, some of the equipment themselves. They might be able to organise care packages themselves in certain situations.
Yeah.
And that's quite specific, but they will guide you through that. Or they will be able to make referrals to other specialists like the Mariecurie or Macmillan teams.
Yeah, and again, from personal experience, my nan, she got a lot of support with special, what are they called? The blow up where you sit so you don't get bed sores.
Pressure relieving equipment.
Yeah, and that made such a difference. And that was triggered by the district nurse. So I think it's those little things that make such a difference, don't they?
Absolutely. And the support that the district nurses will give, and again, I'm not a nurse, I'm not speaking from any place of knowledge, but having worked with lots of really lovely nurses, there will be some support that's needed maybe in the earlier stages, and some support that's needed as things progress, and maybe pressure relieving equipment as we start to be able to move a bit less, and maybe if we lose weight or other different factors, people are at risk of developing what we call pressure ulcers. So they can look at all the right equipment, cushions for your seat, special mattresses for the bed, and various different things, as well as actually, and prevention is always better, but they can treat and care for those pressure ulcers if they develop. There are lots of specialist things that they can do. And then they will also be assessing and observing and caring for the person and providing input. It might initially be just one visit that they need to make and give you the information and then say, call us back if things change.
Yeah.
But then when things do start to change and you need them more frequently, they will start to come back more often. That might be once a week. It might even be a couple of times a week, depending on the situation. And then sometimes as things progress even more, and maybe we're looking at someone being very poorly and maybe in their last days of life, those district nurses may be visiting every day, depending on what the person needs. But they will certainly be your key contact at that point, and they will be your key sort of support mechanism.
And I think that's really important, because I remember when my nan was caring for my granddad, who died at home of cancer, and the later stages, they can feel not only emotionally overwhelming, but there's a lot of medication if they're trying to manage pain, and it can be quite overwhelming. Carers often say, I'm not a nurse.
Exactly.
I don't know what's best, what I'm doing. So it's important that people know that support is there.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. And I think carers, what I've heard carers say is sometimes it's really quite frightening.
Yeah.
And that literally, as you said, I'm not a nurse, I'm not sure I can do this.
Yeah.
And please tell us that, because it might be that there are care workers, there might be a care agency that can come in and support with medication, support with moving the person in bed if they're nursed in bed.
Yeah.
Because again, you can be frightened of hurting the person or frightened of doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But in a sense, if you don't tell people that, they're going to think that you're coping just fine, especially because you may well be trying to put on a brave face for the rest of your care, looking like you're coping absolutely fine, and underneath you're paddling like mad.
Yeah.
So please tell people support is available. So things that you can't do, there will be others that can do it, or training that you might need. Again, you can do it. And when it comes to things like medication, and again, I'm not a nurse and cannot give any kind of advice, but sometimes if people then stop being able to eat and drink and can't take tablets orally, through their mouth anymore, there are other things that can be done, and the nurses would be involved at that stage in doing those. The medication might be given through injections, or you can have things called a syringe driver where it's given directly into the body. And district nurses would visit every day if things like that were needed.
And with regard to hospices and people's wishes, at that stage, how would a hospice get involved if that was the case, if someone wanted that?
That's a really good question. And actually, that there's almost like a broader conversation around that. I think when you're talking with the person you're caring for, I would say be realistic about what you can and can't do. And that might change over time because this could be short or it could be long.
Yeah.
And it could be a bit of a roller coaster. People often use that expression. So it's thinking about if you needed more support than I could give, or you got more poorly and things became more complicated, it might be that we need to think about you being cared for with extra support or in a different place.
Yeah.
That might be in a hospice, it might be in a care home, or it might be in a nursing home. It might be a care agency coming into the house to help. But in terms of hospices, they certainly locally, and I think this is the case nationally, hospices will provide a range of support, not just an inpatient unit. So hospices will have beds where people who need them can go in to be cared for 24/7. Now, if that's the case, and that might be for a short period of time for some symptoms to be managed, like for the person to come home again.
You've heard that, like pain management.
Pain management, if it's particularly complex and can't be managed in the community, it might be that they suggest just a short, maybe a few days, a week or so in the hospice where you've got the doctors, the specialist doctors and nurses 24/7 to get on top of that and get the right medication regime in place to allow the person to come back home again.
Mm-hmm.
Or it might be that the person actually wants to or needs to go to the hospice to die. That more people die at home, and hospice beds aren't huge numbers anymore and never have been, but pressures on hospices are more.
Yeah.
So it will always be, in answer to your original question, it will always be a medical professional that has to make the referral to a hospice. Now, you can have, and I would encourage you to have the conversation, say, is this an option?
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I think it would be good for it to be considered. This is my mum's wishes, or this is the situation at home. Maybe there's a special factor at home. Maybe there's a person with additional needs. Maybe things are complex. Maybe the physical setup at home is such that the person can't adequately be cared for. Maybe there's no room for a hospital bed or something like that. Or maybe there are very young children at home, or, it's got to be a family decision. Exactly. Everyone's situation is so unique. So speak to the district nurse or the GP or whichever medical professionals are involved and say, do you think this might be an option? And it would be them that would make the referral. And then the hospice would look at that referral and decide if that's what was needed. And actually, they would also be offering other support or advising on other support. So hospices have doctors who can come out and visit people in the community if needed as well. Again, you mentioned pain. They've got specialist doctors. So their support isn't just an inpatient unit.
Yeah.
And a hospice doesn't need to be involved for everyone who is approaching end of life. They only get involved where it's needed. So don't feel like you have to have a hospice involved. District nurses are very skilled and very experienced in supporting so many people through to death, and then caring for them and caring for the family a little bit afterwards. So there are different options, and nursing home could be another option for somebody who doesn't maybe need the specialist care that's in a hospice, but does need to be cared for in a 24-hour nursing setting with nurses on duty.
Yeah,
it's another option.
And again, just going through those options from a carer's perspective, it must be very overwhelming at times to think about all of these, as well as going through the emotions of potentially losing someone, that you love and that. But that's why we say it's so important for carers to look after themselves, and especially in this situation.
Absolutely. Those carers, you do need to, and you are so valued. You need to look after yourself. For yourself, for your own well-being, but also if you can't do it for yourself, do it for the person you're looking after, because that little expression we always use, you can't pour from an empty cup, can you?
Yeah, so true.
We need to look after ourselves, and I know that's easier said than done, and carers, particularly at end of life, often put themselves last. But actually it is okay, and it is good to look after yourself that is not just your physical well-being. Be realistic about what you can and can't do. Look at maybe having extra support like a care agency, and maybe trying to take a break and let them do what they can do when they are there.
Yeah.
Just try and let go, build trust in them and try and let go. Give yourself a break. Give yourself any respite opportunity that's presented to you if you feel comfortable to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, everybody's different. That might be family or friends. It might be setting up a family rota of who can come and sit with mum or dad one day a week or for a couple of hours to let you get out and get your hair done or go shopping or go out and do the gardening if that's your thing, or go to exercise. Whatever it is that would give you a break and a distraction, as long as you feel comfortable and give yourself permission to have that distraction and break, know that it is going to be good for you.
Definitely.
So there's your physical well-being, but there's also your emotional well-being. Mm-hmm. Things like pre-bereavement support is available, and that might be through counsellors. And again, there are lots of counselling organisations. It might be just somebody that you can talk to and offload to, a trusted friend. Mm-hmm. You know, go out for a coffee and just let it all out. Crying is good if you want to. Yeah. Don't feel you have to hold things in. You will know the people that you can trust and talk to. And again, if you want to talk to us at the Carers Trust, we've got people that you can talk to. You can talk to any of us. We don't mind if you sit and cry with us. That's absolutely fine.
No,
crying is good. It's better out than in.
It is.
So yeah, just look after yourselves in any way you can, and any support that's offered, or if it's not offered, maybe think about things that people can do to help, because
that's
not
important.
Just now, but after the person has died, how many people say, "Oh, I'm thinking about you. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help." Well, actually, I read this recently and it really resonated with me. When you are grieving or when you are caring for someone and you're overwhelmed, it can be really difficult to make decisions because you're already having to make so many decisions. Yeah. So if someone in a very well-meaning way says, "Let me know if I can do anything," or "What can I do to help?" Actually, that's really difficult. So if there is a time when you think, actually, what would be good would be this, this, and this.
Yeah.
Tell those people that.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're listening to this and you are someone close to a carer, family member, or you are close to someone who's been bereaved, maybe just think about approaching it slightly differently and think about, instead of saying, "Is there anything I can do to help?" say, "Right, I'm going to the supermarket. I'm going to get some grocery shopping. I'm going to get you some things. What do you need at the moment?"
Yeah.
Or if they don't even tell you, there might be toilet rolls, there might be milk, there might be, might be cook a meal for them if that's what you want to do. Come round and do their garden. Come round and sit with them. Or give them a gift voucher for a local restaurant or takeaway service. Things that will just reduce the decisions that they have to make and are really valid support. Offer to look after children, or offer to come and clean the bathroom.
Walk the dog.
Walk the dog, absolutely. Whatever it is that you know your friends, you know your family, whatever will be helpful, try and be specific about the support.
That's a really, really good point, because, we've all been there when someone says, "Oh, just let us know." But actually, that's work in itself, isn't it? You have to think about how what do I need? No, but if someone takes that off you,
someone sees what you might need and just says, "I'm doing it." You do that in a really nice way.
Yeah.
You don't go, "Oh, your bathroom's a mess, I'm going to come and clean your bathroom." You don't want to make the person feel guilty. But actually just offering specific support. I mean, I'm going back years, but back in Northern Ireland where I grew up, there was almost like this women's army that took over if somebody died in the house. And they came and somebody brought meals and filled your freezer. Somebody brought toilet rolls. Somebody cleaned this. Somebody did that. Somebody took the kids away for the day. Somebody would come to the funeral. And actually their purpose would be to stand outside with the children and keep the children occupied. So there was like this women's army that just came and helped practically. And I guess I grew up with that. But we lose that and we do this really polite, caring thing. And we're all busy and we don't know what to do to help. And we all feel a little bit helpless, don't we?
Yeah, definitely.
We love people, we care, but we feel helpless. If you can just take a few seconds to think of something that would actually help and do it and offer it, keep offering and keep doing beyond the funeral. I kind of moved into talking about after bereavement really now, haven't I? But I think a lot of the same things apply.
Yeah, and one thing I would mention to carers as well is that no feeling is invalid. It may be guilt, it may be anger. It's okay to be tired of looking after someone at whatever stage they're at. And I think to express that and to have that safe space with someone, even if it's us, your feelings are valid.
Yeah, absolutely. You couldn't have said it better. I think every feeling is valid. And people can sometimes have complex relationships, and caring can be a really long, demanding job. And you're absolutely right. Whatever feeling at whatever point is natural, and don't hide it. Don't feel ashamed of it. Think about how you can talk to safely about that. And sometimes that might be a friend that's a bit distant, or that might be us at the Carers Trust. And we have lots of carers that tell us things like that, like, I even feel angry at the person for dying and leaving me.
Yeah.
That's so understandable. Absolutely. There's just so many feelings that you might have, and they're all important and they're all genuine. So be honest with yourself.
Yeah. And I guess the worries as well that come with, what's life going to look like after, and you might not be able to talk to people about, those closest to you about those worries. But again, those worries are valid. And I think having the network that we do about carers groups, and certainly the sessions that you run, end-of-life sessions, which you can find on our website and also in the programme of when the next one will come up. What's lovely about those sessions is you get a group of carers in similar situations, and they see that actually they're not alone in those feelings. And that's quite nice. It's magic, isn't it? That is.
Absolutely. Again, you go back to that feeling of isolation. And certainly in this situation, particularly wanting to protect your loved ones, we're all trying to protect each other.
Yeah.
So you might not be able to be fully open about your feelings with those people. So you can be as open as you want to with us, and you can be open with other carers, because they will get it.
Yeah.
No one's situation is exactly the same as anyone else's, but they will get it, and we will get it, and we will understand. So that's, I think those things are really important. Absolutely. And if we think about one's caring role ending, end of life, or indeed if the person moves into a nursing home, it ends in a different way. Actually, that can be huge, depending on what your caring role has looked like. For a lot of people, certainly by that point, their caring role has almost become a really big part of their identity, their purpose, their daily routine. They go to bed thinking about their caring role. They wake up the next morning thinking about their caring role and worrying about the person they're caring for. And with death particularly, that ends. And it ends at a specific moment. Yeah. And your life may well change at that moment. So I wouldn't underestimate all of the feelings that might come with that, and that might change over time with that. But it's almost giving yourself permission to have to get used to this new normal, and thinking about what that new normal is going to look like.
And it's scary.
Absolutely. It might be scary. It might be really scary.
Yeah.
Depending on the relationship with the person, this might be your partner, your husband or wife, or whoever that you've lost, that you have spent more of your life with than without.
Yeah.
And how are you going to be without them? How are you going to be? Who are you going to be without your caring role? For some people, that's the case.
Yeah.
And I would just say that at the Carers Trust, trying to recognise that if people want it, and we totally understand if they don't, but if people want it, we are able to be there to support them for up to a year after the person has died.
Yeah.
And that might be emotional support. It might be practical support. It might be that the person with the care needs has continued doing some practical tasks. Maybe they were the ones that managed the money or the bills or the computer, and you don't know where to start with that. So huge changes can happen after someone has died, and it can be really scary. So there's practical support out there, and there is also emotional support out there from friends, from family, from the Carers Trust, but also from lots of organisations that can support with bereavement counselling and that type of thing. In Solihull, there are lots. There are some that you can have face-to-face. There are some that you can have over the telephone or over Zoom, depending on what's right for you. There are groups where you can get together with other carers, not just at the Carers Trust, but in other places as well. Some of those are about emotional support, and some of them are about socialising. Yeah. So I know at Mariecurie Hospice, they have social groups for people that have been bereaved. That might be like a choir that they've been running. It might be like a walk and talk group. It might be like the Daff Café, where people get together and just talk with others. There's a whole range of support.
They have is there still have the men's shed?
Yes, they do.
And I think that's really, it's hard. Grief between, I don't want to overgeneralise, but men and women may grieve differently, may find different coping strategies. I really liked the idea of the men's shed, because it's kind of that practical support, isn't it? Like, but also emotional. Can you speak a little bit about what you know about?
It is. And to be honest, I was never in a men's shed because I'm not a man. But it was really valued, and it's still going on. I think you're absolutely right, because we all grieve differently and we all deal with our feelings differently. Yeah. And for some people, and maybe more for men than women, the way that they cope with things and the way they talk to each other is through the medium of tasting whiskey, or doing DIY jobs, or
gardening
or practical things with tools and stuff that I don't understand.
Yeah.
And they get really good support from each other and build really good relationships, and sometimes friendships that will then continue through life. So men's sheds are a national organisation, and there are lots of them around the country. There's one in Acox Green as well, but certainly at the Mariecurie Hospice, they specifically have, and they've fundraised and have an actual shed, a big shed, which I've never been in. But there are things like that. So there will be something there for you. Mm-hmm. It's just finding what works for you.
Yeah.
And finding when you're ready to access that. That might be immediately, mm-hmm. or it might be too early. It might be some weeks later. It might be months later. It might even be years later. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it can even be after maybe another bereavement that you realise that actually you've still got lots of feelings that maybe you haven't been able to process about a previous bereavement. So there is support available for you to talk things through or work with others in a way that supports you.
And I will put all the links to these places below in the show notes, but also you can call us as well.
Please do.
Yeah.
Please do. We'll be happy to talk to you. Absolutely. And don't ever worry about asking us a stupid question, because there is no stupid question.
No stupid questions. Now, I know we've spoken about some of the emotional sides, of when caring ends, but there's a lot of practical things that sometimes we have to think about as well. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, and a lot of those practical things need to be done quite quickly, and so that can be a really difficult time when you're feeling potentially overwhelmed with grief. You've just lost someone and you're having to make these decisions. And some people, and I can put myself in this category, actually find that those practical things provided a little bit of distraction, and that they gave me a focus at a time when I probably wouldn't have been able to focus on anything else. But the sorts of things that will need to happen, and please don't feel that you need to do any of these on your own, and you will be guided by people like the district nurses and the GP, and there are lots of written information about this, lots of booklets and so on, that literally take people through step by step what has to be done.
And we can send them to people, can't we?
Absolutely. Yeah, there are lots of things. We can send those to people at the time or beforehand if they want to be prepared for things like that. And there are websites that you can go to. Again, lots of end-of-life charities have websites about things like that. But the sorts of things that you will need to do, someone will need to register the death, and that needs to be done in a certain way. Again, it depends on the area where you live and where the person has died, but there will be specific guidance on that. So don't worry about it. But it is just something that has to happen quite quickly. You'll need to arrange the funeral, and if you've been able to talk about that in advance, and maybe the person will have been able to think about having a funeral plan or funeral arrangement set up. I think that's becoming more common these days, but that's something that you will need to do. In terms of arranging the funeral, actually, there's an organisation, a charity called Quaker Social Action, and they have a website and really good service for people called, it's called Down to Earth. And again, we can put the link to that wherever you want to. And that helps people think about planning a funeral. And that's where that guide that I found was recently about things, like a template form about planning a funeral. but it's also got information about bereavement benefits and how to work out whether you might be entitled to some or not.
That's really
maybe
useful.
help towards funeral costs and ways of options and ways of organising funerals that are maybe more cost effective, because funerals are becoming more expensive. So there are ways of doing things. So I would say that, and I'm sure there are lots of others, that's a good charity website to look at for some really good, helpful information. You might need to deal with your own finances, particularly if this is a person has died where you've maybe got joint bank accounts and that type of thing. So you'll need to go and speak to the bank and do things like that, because there will be costs that you will incur going through in terms of arranging the funeral. And you need to make sure that you can live and you've got enough money, and things like that will worry people. So dealing with things like that, don't put them off, just deal with the banks. And then there will be the person's estate to be dealt with if they have a will or if they don't have a will, in which case probate rules will apply. And again, there's lots of guidance on that. So things like that. There's a few different practical things. They don't all need to be done at once, but they do need to be done relatively quickly.
Yeah.
But absolutely, you will just need to be guided at that stage, step by step, through what to do. Though I think at that time, written information really comes into its own, because it's something you can hold with you, and just reference back as you're going through it.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things that if you put it off, it can sometimes get harder to do. Yeah. So sometimes those things, the practical things, nipping those in the bud and just getting them done is helpful.
Absolutely. And some of them have to be done pretty quickly. Funerals have to be arranged within a specific time period. And that's longer in England than it is in Northern Ireland. Typically in Northern Ireland, a funeral happens 2 or 3 days after the person has died. Days, not weeks. So we were in a situation of having to organise that very, very quickly when we were still exhausted and still reeling from, in my case, our dad's death. So we were so glad, honestly, that we knew what he had wanted, even down to that little bit of paper slid across the table. We knew what songs he wanted at the funeral. We knew what his wishes were.
Makes such a difference. And I would just like to reiterate that, everyone's situation is unique. Relationships are complex, affairs are complex, with money and estate. So if you are struggling with these practical things, we may not have the expertise, but we'll certainly be able to point people in the right direction. So not to feel overwhelmed and to contact us.
We've got lots of information. We're not specialists in this type of thing. And some of these are legal matters and some of these are financial matters. But we absolutely will know who you can talk to for the right support at the right time. So do just give us a call.
Okay, so thank you, Alyson, so much for talking with us. You have a whole heap of knowledge around this that's so valuable, and I know that people will get a lot from it. Everything that we have discussed today, I will put in the show notes below, and you will find more information on our website. But as we've said, please do not hesitate to give us a call, and one of the team will speak with you. But thanks ever so much, Alyson.
No problem. Pleasure.